Hey guys, welcome back. Tisha here, back with another review for Bridgerton. Sorry for the delay on this one, but this episode is kind of a hard one to watch, which is one of the reasons why it took me a little bit longer to come up here with my recap. Go ahead and do me a favor and hit the like button. This episode for me sealed the deal on my love for this particular series. First, I was annoyed when I began watching it because half of the episodes seemed to be clips and flashbacks of things that we already saw. But because of the way it was done, it gave this story a little bit more context. This episode made sense because it filled in some of the gaps. The first episode that we watched made me at times resent George for leaving Charlotte the way that he did, for all the days that he did. But this episode made me come to realize just how much he ended up loving Charlotte and how unworthy of her he felt that he was. Which goes back to now and the way we are now. You look at people and you never really know what someone is going through, because although in this situation, when the king is in public and when you only see him for a moment, you think that he has everything going for himself, there's really something else going on behind the scenes that tells otherwise. So I love seeing the perspective and seeing that the both of them were struggling in their own ways. So we begin this episode with a frustrated Queen Charlotte. She was just out in the cold trying to convince her husband to stop talking to the stars and to come back in the house. Charlotte is now there with Reynolds and Brimsley as she is washing the king with Reynolds. Brimsley says that he can handle it and the queen could, go if she wants to. And at this point, she's not going anywhere because she wants to know what's going on with the king. She's like, is it not allowed, to watch the king? And he's like, no, it's just usually not done that way. And she's not trying to hear it. Reynolds says, you got to excuse the king. He hasn't been himself lately. And the queen is wondering what's happening to her husband, to the point where she's even asking it. He's standing there being washed by her and Reynolds as he is twitching and murmuring something, but he's not responding to them. And then we get a flashback. Reynolds interrupts the king as he's standing outside talking about horses. Reynolds lets him know, hey, your mother, the Dowager Princess, needs you at the palace because I believe she's found you a bride. The king looks like he doesn't want to go, but he goes anyways, goes to see his mom, Princess Augusta, the Dowager Princess. He wants her to hurry up and say what she's going to say because he knows that all she's going to do is tell him about all the great qualities of this prospective queen that is a noble woman and all these other things, when he's not really interested in getting married. Lord Bute is sitting there and Lord Bute is trying to interject, but King George continues his conversation, saying all the things that he feels like his mother is going to tell him. And she's like, look, at the end of the day, what we need to talk about is the importance of you producing an heir. Without one, it's weakening our family position. He asks if that's all the king is expected to do, because he'd rather serve his country in other ways, like doing things like scientific study and improving, their way of life. But his mom is like, you don't need to worry about all that right now. What you need to worry about is the fact that this war has drained us and people need to see the king, a real king, operate. She tells him that even though he doesn't really want to know anything, his future queen is German and she's already on a boat on her way. The betrothal contracts have basically been signed. Everything is done. Once that is said, there is a notable change in George, and he starts to talk to himself. about longitude and the moon and being lost and things of that nature. And Lord Bute and I believe his another person, I don't remember his name, is sitting there and looking at him like, what is going on? His mother sees something is wrong and she orders everyone out. She says, withdraw, withdraw, withdraw. Everybody's leaving. As soon as everybody leaves, she holds George. He falls in her arms and he's like on his knees. Various doctors are called. You see him sitting there as various doctors surround him with various things being said. One doctor says that his symptoms are consistent with inflamed cerebellum. Another says they think, diet is key to fix this. We find out that at this point, it's a week until his wedding, and he's shown no improvements from what's already been done by doctors. So they need to figure out something and fast. And that is when Dr. Monroe steps forward and says, it's time to consider what no one else has considered yet. That the king's condition might not be physical, but it may be nervous. One of the other doctors is like, oh no, you cannot say that. You can't say that because we cannot declare him insane, because if we say he's insane, then he'll lose his throne. Dr. Monroe's saying, I'm not calling it insanity. What I'm saying is he's suffering from disorganization of the nerves, and he's devoted his life to curing it. The other doctors are like, look, you talk about this doctor like he's some good doctor, princess, but you need to know that he's a quack. At first I was like, how y'all gonna call that man a quack just because he didn't study where you study, or just because he tends to deal with more patients that have mental illnesses? But after seeing his methods, I'm going to have to agree, but you all tell me what you think. So at this point, the princess is like, look, I've been seeing you all for a long time. Y'all have done nothing. His condition has not improved. I don't have any other options. So Dr. Monroe, you go ahead and continue. Dr. Monroe says, my methods aren't like the other doctors because I'm basically not going to torture him. I'm not going to put beetles on him and things that nature. Instead, what I'm going to do is talk to him. Keep that in mind, that he said he's not going to torture him. We'll get back to that. So he goes to King George and he tells him to remember that he is king. He says, listen, boy, remember yourself. You are the king of England. You have thousands prepared to die at a word from you. You have armies at your command. You command an entire kingdom. You command yourself too. And you hear George, like, as he's breathing and it changes, and he's going from where he was stammering and twitching to now looking at him because he's holding him by the head. And he says to George, are you fit to get married in a week? And George nods and says, yes, I am. Next, we see a lot of what we saw with the different people arriving and things of that nature. But this time we get to see George arrive for his wedding. He is dressed and ready to go. Brimsley is looking for Charlotte. George is sitting in the chair when he overhears Brimsley telling Reynolds that the bride is missing. We see George start to struggle hearing this. His hand is shaky. He gets up and walks out. I noticed that whenever anything is extremely stressful, that this happens to him, and it seems to be made worse by different things, but you all tell me what you think. So he walks and he runs into Dr. Monroe and he tells him that the bride has disappeared, which may be good because he thinks that he needs to disappear as well because he's not ready for this. He's shaking like, look, see, I'm not ready. And the doctor holds his hand, and I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be a nice moment. He holds his hand to stop the shaking. Dr. Monroe tells him he's fine as he holds his hand, tells him you are perfectly right, then smacks the sugar honey iced tea out of him in his face. I mean, it's across his face, to the point where All of the footmen are running in that direction, pulling their swords. You hear the swords being drawn because they're ready to slice up the doctor. And the moment I saw the doctor slap him like that, I knew that I didn't like him. I knew that he was no good. He was a little creepy to me at first, but that right there let me know, okay, I'm not going to like this doctor. So he prevents him from getting sliced up, and he's like, no, 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 it's okay. Thank you, doctor. He walks off. George ends up in the garden, finds Charlotte, and the rest is history. We've already seen it played out. The song Deja Vu, the violin version, or we should say strings, is playing in the background. We see them get married, they kiss, they dance, they leave together. Queen Charlotte is asking George what the surprise is for her. They arrive at Buckingham House. We then see them get into the end of that argument where he tells her that he is her king and he leaves. Flash to Reynolds, who is at the house, the queue, where he sees two footmen drunk on the stairs. They think that they have the night off because the king is away at Buckingham. But Reynolds comes back and informs them that they do not have the night off because the king is back. They then jump up as the carriage arrives to greet him. George tells Reynolds, observatory now, just you. And they go in there. As they talk, Reynolds is trying to figure out what's going on. If the reason why he didn't stay is because he's unattracted to the queen or if she's dull. And George is like, no, he's actually taken by her, to the point where he basically says that she is brilliant and she's beautiful. And he feels like a troll in comparison to her. And we know that on this night, she herself was thinking that based on him leaving, that he wasn't attracted to her because of the way that he acted towards her. So she's thinking she's not good enough. Meanwhile, he's thinking he's not good enough for her. Just goes to show you the position they both were in and how important communication is. He tells Reynolds, like, look, I'm married. I did what I was asked of me. Now I need to leave my new queen alone where she's safe away from me, which means for whatever reason, he feels like he's legitimately a danger to her. Makes me wonder what types of things he has done as a result of his illness. We flash to Charlotte, who tells Brimsley to get her carriage ready so she can visit the king. Reynolds lets the king know the queen is on her way. She arrives with Brimsley at Kew. Reynolds directs her to the observatory where the king is. Brimsley and Reynolds talk about Queen Charlotte and how she stands up to the king and how that can be good or it can be bad. We see Charlotte explaining to the king how hard it is for her, that she can't go out and she can't make friends, and she knows no one except him, and he seems to prefer the sky over her. We see him say, I don't want to fight. She tells him to fight with her, to fight for her. He tells her to go home. She leaves. So it's another day. Reynolds shows Dr. Monroe into the observatory. The king says that he has learned that scientists keep the best secrets to themselves. It can be years before the public is aware of some of the newer discoveries. And he's relating that to himself and his condition. He says, for example, if a doctor were called to treat a king, he'd keep the cutting edge methods to himself until they were proven. And the doctor basically agrees. So he wants to try something more radical. He wants the doctor to make his fits that he has, because he calls them fits, go away permanently. Dr. Monroe lets him know that he does have something, but in order to do it, he's going to have to be able to have full access to the king at all times, as well as the king's palace. He tells him that this next method is going to use extreme measures. George doesn't care about any of that. He wants to be well so he can hurry up and get back to his queen, so he agrees to it. While this conversation is going on, Charlotte is waking up at her palace and she's alone, and all the servants are serving her. So the servants are serving her, but she's completely unaware of what's about to happen to her king. And then the pensive, eerie Oh my goodness, this isn't going to be good. Music begins to play. Monroe explains to the king that he has to always use others and he's accustomed to others listening to him, but he needs to learn to obey. He then has his assistants pull George out of bed. You see him shaving the king, but it's not making me comfortable. Like, I kept feeling like, oh my God, is he gonna cut his neck? Is he gonna cut him? Because what are we doing here? He says, we require solitude, and sends everyone else out of the room. Now, you know, the king always has a whole bunch of staff, just like the queen. So it's just him and basically his assistants that are doing things with the king, because the doctor is now able to treat George like crap, to the point where we see him bathed in ice water. His head is being forced continuously underwater. He's fed meals that you would give like people of lower class. He's left in a room where he's in a cellar and he's strapped into a chair and he's gagged with a ball gag. And we are seeing him being tortured. And while he's being tortured, Charlotte too is being tortured, but it's in a different way, because her torture isn't physical. Her torture is mental, because she is lonely. She's sitting there eating meals by herself. The doctor then does this whole rant about how, you know, I'm basically gonna break you. He straps him down, gags him, puts leeches on him, burns him at some point with wax, I think. Oh, well, did I see him burning with wax? I know he had a whole bunch of different things that he was using to torture him. Like, there was all types of objects and insects and stuff around him that he was using. He calls out to the doctor at one point after you hear him yelling and all the other stuff, and says that they've been at it for days. He wants to know how much longer this is going to be. Dr. Monroe's like, look, we're going to continue this until we achieve our goal, which the goal is for him to not have any more fits. But we all know that's not the way to do it. George tells him, if they do this any longer, you don't have to worry about just losing the fits, that he's going to end up losing himself and he's not going to return, because the method is really like beating him down. The doctor tells him, you know, this is a terror-based method. So this is what is going to do. And that eventually you'll be domesticated like wolves were domesticated into dogs. None of this has anything to do with his mind, in my opinion. I think that the doctor just gets off on torturing him. So we see Reynolds and Brimsley discuss the king and queen consummating their marriage. Brimsley suggests having the king send over something to the queen. Reynolds goes to check on the king, sees him being dunked in ice water by the assistants. He asks George if he's okay, because he's not liking the little bit that he's seeing. George says that, you know, he does have doubts about the treatment, but he has to try for the queen. Reynolds says, you know, you can do whatever you want to do. You are king. Instead of doing this, you could be with the queen right now. But the king is worried about how unpredictable she is, saying that she's not like anyone he's ever experienced. She doesn't follow his orders. She's too dangerous for a man like him, meaning he doesn't know what her reaction would be if she were to find out that he has these fits, and he can't risk it. So he has to try to get rid of the fits in order to see her. Reynolds says, you're saying all of that, but the two of you might just be a perfect match. We then see the king as he watches the queen as she sits outside and she's playing a game of chess with herself, by herself, playing both sides of the board. Reynolds thinks that she's lonely and suggests providing something for the queen, some type of sign that she's not alone and he'll be with her soon. They end up sneaking into the doctor's lab, taking one of the dogs out, giving it to the queen, and he sends a note to let her know that they will not be caged forever. We know that the queen didn't like the dog. We later see the doctor shaving the queen, and he's asking him about the security because his dog is missing. King George thinks maybe the dog got tired of captivity. Monroe thinks that the king has been spending too much time in his observatory and not enough time doing his treatment. And he's like, if you don't, get with it, you're going to have another fit. Unfortunately, no, I don't want to say unfortunately, because it's not, the fits are unfortunately, the fits are inevitable. Like, it's just something that is a part of him. I don't know what the fits are. I don't know what to call it, but he's gonna have these. It's been happening. It's been ongoing. It seems to be a thing. It's just what it is. All right. He gets a message from, excuse me, from his mom. He opens it and it says one word: consummate. Reynolds then comes in and tells the king that the queen has received his gift. Now, they took the gift as one of the doctor's dogs. The doctor doesn't know it's his dog, so they're just calling it a gift. And he says she called it a deformed bunny. And George laughs. He looks at Monroe, the doctor, tells him, look, there's not going to be no ice baths or any chairs today. The doctor tells him he needs to stay. He's like, I'd rather work outside on my farm today. So we see the king working on his farm. He's showing the farmer how well the horse that they have works. The king is now hungry. He says he wants to eat. The farmer says, I don't have anything nearby, but I could go grab this. He says, you know what? I think I'm going to go eat with my wife. So Reynolds and Brimsley watch as the table is set for dinner. Brimsley is trying to figure out what happened now that all of a sudden, when he hasn't been seeing her this whole time, that the king has decided to come to Buckingham. He asks if the king's condition is healed, because the king, he thinks something's been wrong with the king. And since he caught him down in the cellar, he saw the doctor with him. And he's like, we could work together for this. And he's, he'll be useful. Reynolds is like, look, I don't need your help. I need you to stay down. In other words, stay in your place. As they're waiting, it's a long time, and you see that George is starting to have tremors. He's hearing things. He's looking around. Reynolds sees this, steps forward, and he puts his hand on his left shoulder, which stops his tremors. I think his condition gets worse when he gets nervous, as I said. But that moment to me also shows how attentive Reynolds is to the king, number one. And number two, how much he loves him. And yes, it's a platonic love, because we know him and Brimsley. I just feel like you have to have a certain amount of care to be willing to step in like that. And as soon as the tremor stops, he backs up. So it's not overly noticeable to the other staff. Queen Charlotte finally arrives. He asks if it's okay to join her for a meal. She's upset, leaves. He follows her. He does the whole spiel about how, I know you have no reason to trust me after what I've done. Just give me one evening to show you where my mind has been. And they kiss, and then she asks him if he's coming home. He says yes. This is when we later see the things being moved out of queue. Dr. Monroe is upset about this, tells him that we don't need to end things. But I won't be seeing you as often, doctor. Dr. Monroe says, I'm worried about the consequences of this for your health, but the king feels like he's healthier than he's been in years, which means this is something that has been troubling him for years. Right? Later, George talks to his mom about consummate, and we know that Charlotte overheard it. They don't show that part because he's unaware of it. He confirms that he did. Reynolds tells George, after they're fussing, that the princess has left and that Queen Charlotte is in the dining room having breakfast. We see George suddenly, collapse in the seat. He tells Reynolds to get the doctor, the promise that Charlotte will never know. We then know that they consummated more than once. We see where she asks him if he's not well because he saw the doctor, and he makes an excuse. Her looking in the mirror at herself, rubbing her stomach. Them deciding not to have, the even days and odd days thing anymore. Then he's back to see the doctor. We see Monroe shaving him. He tells him that they have to do it in the cellar because Charlotte can't know about him. And the doctor's like, well, I'm worried about the humidity and you haven't been in the chair. If we backtrack on our treatment, we risk losing, all this progress that we've made. And the king is like, look, we haven't made any progress. My progress has come because of my wife. She's done more good for me than your chair ever could. And he's over there like, oh, you really think so? I'm warning you. And he's shaving him as he's saying this. And the king takes the razor from the doctor and finishes shaving himself. And he's like, I've lived my whole life living in fear of doing something incorrectly to the point where the terror has nearly broken me. I thought it was the price of being royal, but I've met a woman who is never terrified. She does as she pleases, and she's the most royal person I've ever known. He says, I gotta go. And he heads to the Danbury Ball. We know how that went. We see him telling her that she's united society with one party. We see the both of them cuddling. Then we see he pulls away from her as she sleeps, and he's, watching her, right? He then gets up. He sees Dr. Monroe in the kitchen making something. He tells Dr. Monroe he'll never treat him again. He's like, you don't got to worry about me treating you because apparently now I'm treating your queen. I'm making her something. And George is like, making her what? Stay away from her. He says, she came to me after hearing that I was your doctor because she's pregnant. Congratulations. And I was like, dang, you couldn't even let the girl tell him her own story. He goes back to his queen and he is watching her again. And you can tell once again, he's stressed out and things start to happen. So he's scribbling on the wall. Queen Charlotte awakes, finds him. He does the whole Venus thing. She convinces him to come back inside. He's getting bathed, the whole accent thing. So he falls asleep. When he wakes up, he sees the writing on the wall and he looks out the window to see the queen's carriage leaving. He calls for Reynolds for his carriage because he has to go follow her because he doesn't know what's happening now that she sees this, because it's his biggest fear. He didn't want her to know. The Queen Charlotte tells Brimsley to stop as she goes to see the princess. She says she notices that as soon as the king arrived at Buckingham House, that all the sharp knives were replaced with dull ones. She thought it was a coincidence, but then she noticed that the windows on the second floor were sealed shut and that locks started appearing in all sorts of places. And the final straw for her was when one of the books that she likes was missing, and it's about a mad king. She thought that she was the damaged one, but now she realizes it's him. And Princess Augusta's like, you're not going to talk about my son like that. The king is not mad. He's just exhausted from carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Once you produce an heir, you'll be in the position that I was in. Watch your son start to crack and you'll decide to do anything to stop the cracking. As this is being said, they don't know it, but George is on the outside of the door and he can overhear this entire conversation with the two of them fighting. I can only imagine how badly this hurt him because he already felt that he wasn't worthy of her, and now hearing her complain about what she's discovered had to hurt him even more. Charlotte says, if she has to leave everything she's ever known for a man, it can't be one that she doesn't know, one who she wasn't allowed to know. Meaning, you got me here on false pretenses. You tricked me. You guys didn't tell me the truth about what the situation is. We see George walk away. He looks defeated, and we see him go to the doctor, and he tells him to strap him back in as he walks towards the chair. And that's how it ends. That last part of this episode broke me, with him going back to that doctor in desperation after overhearing his mother and Charlotte. It's one thing to have to deal with mental illness. It's another thing to try to do that with all eyes on you, with the weight of your country on your shoulders, while being forced to marry someone that you do not know, who you're trying to keep safe from you, who you can't even reveal this major part of you to. He just wants to be cured. And all I kept thinking was, poor George. But you all, let me know what you think of this episode. Leave your thoughts down below. How do you guys feel about the way Charlotte handled the situation with running back to his mother and saying something? I think that she did what she needed to do, but you all tell me what you think. Until next time.